Coaches, we know there's a lot of content online for you to watch with regard to drills. Not all of those drills are applicable to your age player. I think it's important that we have a conversation here about age-appropriate drills for your players. Let's start with throwing. Shon, how would you break up throwing for a younger player versus an older player?
Well, first I'd make sure that we have the right grip with a four-seam grip and the thumb underneath the ball and fingers behind the ball, and make sure that we have a good release with our wrist braking and working direction with our arm towards our target.
Are there any things you see coaches doing that is more applicable to older players that we shouldn't be doing with younger players?
Yeah, maybe throwing for distance, throwing for a longer distance, or trying to work catch into the throw, because those are two separate skills. You should work catching as separate from your throwing, and just make sure that you're focusing on the throwing at the throwing at the young age, and then incorporate more as you go on.
Is there a distance you would recommend, base path or otherwise, that might be a good gauge for coaches to use with throwing?
Yeah,
distance?
wherever they're comfortable. I think you can monitor their arm strength a little bit, but keep them short so their success rate's high, and just make sure that they're repping at the same distance so they can keep it consistent with their mechanics.
When should coaches start incorporating different arm slots into the throwing program?
Well, that should probably become later. I think you want the natural part of your arm slot to be part of the player and not change too much. Obviously, you want them to get over the top and just make sure that your grip and it's coming out with the backspin, and using some different balls that can tell you what the spin is in the ball. But keeping it simple for those guys is really important.
And you mentioned natural athleticism of players. How much should we allow players to be just natural throwing versus trying to correct something that looks more like we see in a finished high school product?
Yeah, I think being natural is very important, in making sure that we continue to work with with the arm slot that they have, and let the game kind of figure out where they land with the arm slot that they have. But keeping it pretty simple and just making sure that they're accurate with where they're throwing is the main thing. So the three things that we would try to do is just make sure that we don't overthrow or get too far with our distance. We have a good grip, and we make sure that our arm action has some backspin to the ball when we release.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'd like to add, I think when you have young kids, you just have to make sure you create stations out of everything. You don't want to send them down the line on the first day of practice and assume that they can play catch. So I love your point about breaking them up into groups, separating catching from throwing, and maybe make it target practice. So we put a ball on top of a tee and have players line up in a horizontal line and throw to a target rather than throw to their partners, where we have no idea if the kids can even catch it.
Shon, I love your points about keeping it simple. Minimize the distance, manage the workload, really work on athletic throwing. And Steve, I love the point about throwing accuracy, throwing to a target every time. Every throw should be to a target. Great stuff, guys.